I am going to confess one of my guilty pleasures to you. I am a person who likes the genre of joyful surprise videos on YouTube. Now, two of my favorite subgenres of this surprise video genre are dogs reuniting with their owners after a long period of separation, and prospective parents surprising their loved ones with the news that they're expecting a child. It is a long and deep rabbit hole, my friends. And I cried joyful tears the whole way down. In an old favorite, a man is sitting on a park bench after having been away from his dog for years. The man has changed. He looks different. He's older, maybe thinner. He's been in prison or maybe a hospital, and it has been a long, hard time since he and his dog have seen each other. Now, when his dog approaches him, he is suspicious, and he creeps up, sort of growling with his tail down, moving slowly, while the man sits stock still and waits. But when the dog gets within a few feet of the man, he finally recognizes his scent, and the dog's body bursts into joy, and then he's jumping and running and licking the man's face and wagging his tail so hard that his butt is swinging wildly. It is laughing, clapping, crying joy. The unknown can sometimes contain the best surprises. It can also genuinely contain the worst. It makes it hard to sit in the waiting room, in the spaces of ambiguity when we genuinely don't know how the story will end. It can be hard to even hope for the best when we know that the worst is on the table. We're in a season of darkness now, where the night is growing longer and longer and the cold is deepening. Many traditions tell stories of light during this time of year, stories of mystery and miracle and the return of the sun. It's also a time when the soul settles down into itself, a feeling that can be restful or distressing, depending on your soul's sense of safety and your relationship with stillness. In our part of the world, nature itself is settling in. Nature is growing quiet and hunkering down for the fallow part of the year when the seeds are nesting deep in the ground and the bears are retreating to their caves and the geese are heading south for the season. Our own fallow waiting might look different in our capitalist world of keep on going through the freezing cold. But there's still a quality to this season that calls the quiet. Our bodies still respond to the darkening earth and to natural patterns of stillness. What does fallow time, stillness, waiting feel like for you? Is there maybe some bit of news that you're waiting for, or someone you're waiting for, or who is waiting for you? Or maybe you're just noticing that your body is slowing down, or your sleep is getting longer, or your desire for sleep is growing. In the Christian tradition, we're in the season of Advent. That word, Advent, it means the arrival of something notable, something important. For Christians, in the Advent season. It's the arrival of the baby, Jesus, and the season is about preparing for that miracle, for the baby. At the beginning of that story, a virgin named Mary is visited by the archangel Gabriel, who tells her that she will give birth to a son who is the Son of God and will be the king of Jacob's people forever. And Mary's like, cool. But I'm a virgin, so talk about a surprise expectant parent video. But the angel was like, don't worry about it. The Holy Spirit's going to take care of it. And Mary was like, oh, okay, that sounds legit. The story that gets told at this time of year is one of delight, one of mystery and miracle and new life, babies being born. Every year here at First Church on Christmas Eve, we read Sophia Lyon-Faz's poem, "Every Night a Child is Born is a Holy Night." And then I tell a different birth story about the miracle and promise of every sacred human life being born. In Unitarian Universalism, we believe that each sacred life is a miracle, an original blessing in community on this earth. And also, each human life contains suffering. Each of us is born with death as the twin of our lives, with the known shadow of life that is death, always with us. The very real consequence of being born, of being alive, is mortality. Every new parent lives with the holy terror of their child's death as part of the joy-filled and complicated and sometimes boring and often challenging and occasionally terrifying journey of being a parent. Each life contains the certainty of death baked in. But the ambiguity of life's journey, with its twists and its turns, its hopes and its tragedies, is strung along a mysterious line between the two certain poles of life and death. Faz writes in her poem that parents, quote, sitting beside their children's cribs, feel the glory in the sight of new life beginning. They ask, where and how will this new life end, or will it ever end? For each night a child is born is a holy night, a time for singing, a time for wondering, a time for worshiping. We don't know what will happen. We don't know what will happen in our lives or the lives of those we love. We don't know how the story goes. There is a mystery at the heart of the universe that shows up in our individual lives as ambiguity. We don't know how our stories will go. We don't know how our particles will collide, how our collection of energy will decide and run into other collections of energy, and how we will impact one another and change ourselves. We don't know how the world will run and weave and fold and transform. Both the best and the worst of life is contained in this mystery. the laughing, clapping reunion of dog and owner, the new baby, the mystery of love, the comfort of human kindness, and the terrible news, the diagnosis, the unimaginable loss, the renewed war, the cruelty, the violence. The ambiguity between those two poles can feel terrifying. And we hold one another. We show up for one another in the waiting times, in the stillness and the quiet. And we practice holding out hope, because the ambiguity also contains the best that can happen. The surprising ways that the worst stories, collectively and individually, can twist and turn back to love with time. In the story of Christmas, for example, the story that gets told this season, there is this new human life that is born. And it's celebrated, as all lives should be, with stars and gifts and song and hope. And then that life, that particular human life that we talk about in the Christmas story, is also embedded in poverty, in empire, in a ruler's cruelty. Early twists and turns in that story include ethnic cleansing and running from violence at home and becoming refugees. And as that life goes on, some pretty amazing things happen too. Incredible love and beautiful stories and miracles and human beings creating life-giving community together. But the story, Jesus' life story, it ends kind of badly. Except that's not the end of that story. There are some really surprising twists and turns and ways that love lives beyond death, and that human community carries love and hope against all odds, resisting violent oppression and insisting that there is more meaning to this life than power and violence and control. And still, even there, the story does not end. It keeps going through that community's encounter with empire and violence and resistance and transformation and returning to love again and again. And even now, the story continues. That started with one life 2,000 years ago. It's not over. It's still living with us in our relationships with hope and resistance and empire, and also with how we engage with that particular and complicated story in this particular and complicated society, and how communities continue to reinterpret it and change and transform themselves. Stories are like that. They keep on going and changing and transforming. They live beyond individual human lives, both changing them and changing with them as we change and grow and transform in community. The Christmas story is both one story and 1,000 stories. 1,000,000 stories, an infinite number of stories that get interpreted and reinterpreted as we change and make meaning together over time. Studies have shown that human beings are actually pretty bad at predicting how much we will change over time. We're pretty good at looking back and seeing how different our lives are today than they were 5 years ago or even 10 years ago. But when we are asked to imagine how different our lives might be 5 years or 10 years from now, most of us imagine they'll be fairly similar. And they won't. We'll change as much in the next 5 years or 10 years as we have in the previous 5 or 10. And that might sound exciting or it might sound terrifying. But the good news is that some of those changes will be beautiful beyond your wildest imaginings. Some of the twists and turns of life will be joy-filled surprises, even ones that come on the heels of terrible loss. Some of those twists and turns will be new life and new love that you had no idea was coming. As long as you're alive, the story isn't over. And as long as storytellers are alive, the bigger story, our shared story, our collective story, it's not over. Our individual pieces of the story keep going through the community's story and the way that we live on through our shared knowing of one another. And in that big, twisting story, there is beauty that we haven't even been able to imagine yet. But we're part of it because we're here and we're living into that beauty and that possibility right now. In London in 1926, a 35-year-old fledgling author was grieving her mother's death when her husband of 12 years told her that he was in love with another woman and he asked for a divorce. The couple had a 7-year-old daughter. They were married when they were in their early 20s, and the woman was absolutely devastated by her husband's abandonment in her time of grief. She felt like she had lost everything, and she struggled to find meaning in her life. She chose to continue on for her daughter, but she didn't see a point in her own life. All the love and all the joy had gone out of it. Over the course of the next year, she reached out for support as she struggled. She moved in with friends. She sought psychiatric care. In that time, she republished some older stories because she was struggling too much emotionally to write anything new, and she needed the money. But everything at that time felt like a chore. Writing, living, parenting. And then a series of surprises took her life down a path that she never expected. First, the woman's 1926 novel started to take off. The Murder of Roger Ackroyd, a novel featuring a clever detective named Hercule Poirot, turned a woman who wrote her first detective novel to win a bet with her sister into a household name. You might have heard of her, Agatha Christie. And then, after an interesting conversation at a dinner party, the woman decided to go on an adventure to mend her broken heart. She booked a solo ticket on the Orient Express, which led not only to one of her most famous novels, but also to her meeting her second husband, the love of her life, Max Mallowan. They were married in 1930, and they were together until Christie's death 46 years later. In 1926, Agatha Christie was so grief-ridden that she did not see the point in living. By 1930, her career had taken off and she had married the love of her life. She lived for another half-century, and she became the world's best-selling novelist of all time, outsold only by Shakespeare and the Bible. Life is surprising. It contains awfulness, as one of Christie's novels will surely tell you about. But it also contains the most amazing surprises, things that you can't even imagine yet. And the surprises will keep on coming. Some of them will be twists and turns of life that contain beauty and love and connection around corners that you cannot see. It doesn't take away any of the loss or the horror, but there is still beauty in the future. If you're still here, then it's not the end of the story yet. And there is hope in that unknown stretching out in front of you. There's love and luck and joy yet to come, even if it feels like it's been years since it's been here. It's coming. I promise. May it be so.